am excited to be connected to all of you. This is an extraordinary time to be together. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to engage with all of you after an extraordinary week of participation from this global community. Thank you for the many thousands that have decided to engage in this way. It's thrilling to be plugged in to so many of you for an opportunity that the world, I think, is in crisis over the lack of exactly what we've done this week, which is a moment of silence. And so I am thrilled to be able to engage with all of you with the idea that the world is in need of a moment of rest. And we've had a forced rest on the global economy, but for many of this has forced us into a scrambling process of damage control, whether it be for the education of our children or for the sustainability of our jobs or our roles as employers or whatnot. And so just an extraordinary outpouring of effort and reorganization of the world in these last few months of the pandemic, and the demands it's put on each household have had exciting impact in many homes, but has also had devastating effects. And I recognize the pressure cooker that's been put on so many families, in which we have seen coming out of that an increase in child abuse, sexual abuse, and beyond. And so this is the heartbreak that I have for the world right now, is that when we go into these pressure cooker moments, it's usually the most vulnerable among us, the children, women, minorities, that tend to be crushed the hardest. The 125 million jobs that were lost in the first month of the pandemic were largely in households across the world that were on the brink of poverty even before the event. And then the other 125 million jobs that have quickly followed have been in a similar cascade of effects for families that could not pay the bills with missing one paycheck, have now missed many months of paychecks. And while there may be government relief for US workers, we recognize that internationally our developing nation partners and developing nation sisters and brothers out there have not had that safety net there, and are suffering severe crisis of lack of food, lack of resources, lack of security. And in this time, I think it's meaningful for us to act in a way to meet them where they're at, and consider the rich blessings that the 1% of the world has, and also recognize the devastating effects that the consumptive economy, consumer behavior has had on the 99% of the population that has bent their backs to the production and efforts to serve that consumer society that is the Western civilization, and really eager to see the ramifications of this dramatic pause that we've put on one side, but a little bit of disappointment that our reaction to that pause of retail and everything else has been an explosion of reinforcing the strength and monopoly of the Amazons of the world and the Googles of the world and all of this. And so tragically, we were unable to really stem consumer behavior. We just changed its format. And so I hope in this week, as we have considered fasting, whether you've been with me in intermittent fasting, or if you've forged already into long-term water fasting or juice fasting, whatever you're doing, or even if you're just considering these things for the first time, I want to just congratulate you for the effort to bring some silence into your mind, into your day, to bring some rest to your gut, to your immune system, to your physiology, so that we might be able to acknowledge, the true hunger and this true starvation that's going on across the world. And so in that heartbreaking moment, we can also see a huge opportunity. And that opportunity is one, I think, that begins at the spiritual realm, as we start to connect at the energetic level as humanity and ask each other, what is the future that we want? We have seen the pendulum swing to this extreme measure in this pandemic, where we see the abuse of pseudoscience and the abuse of fractured information and manipulative information coming out of the science and public health statistics, all of these things being used to justify radical reductions in our civil liberties, radical changes in our fabric of our societies across many different sociopolitical environments of Europe, South America, US. I was recently in Fiji, right, as this was all unfolding. And even in a country like that, you can see the erosion of civil liberties and freedom and the rest. Certainly China has seen a massive lockdown in that communist nation. And they're just barely starting to get ahead of the curve. The United States is nowhere near catching up to the speed at which China is recovering right now. So there's evidence that there is no sociopolitical stance that could have protected you from the crushing blows of the fear paradigm that have been wielded by this pseudoscience era, and a real risk that we all face together, which is a global vulnerability of human health that's never been so severe. And that, of course, stems back to our failure to fast and rest these immune systems over the years in the past. And then we've been in this locked consumer behavior with our intake of constant food and energy drinks and even our fancy supplements and everything else that you can think of. Those can create a false sense of pursuit of health, and we can forget to pause. We can forget to take that moment to breathe together, take that moment to give a resilient sense of opportunity to focus. What we have seen with the pandemic, I believe, is the very first time we've seen the whole globe meditate on one thing. That one thing may be artificial, it may be, a false fear, or maybe a real fear. It's almost irrelevant. It's sad that it took fear to focus us, but let's take advantage of that opportunity to acknowledge that humanity, 7.8 billion strong, have paused for a moment to focus on one thing. And that collective energy of 7.8 billion minds and spirits focused on a single thing has given this whole pandemic an energy of its own. And I think it's been to our own detriment, but nonetheless, it's shown us something of the power of shared intention. We certainly halted a massive oil and gas industry. We certainly halted a massive transportation industry. We halted an energy sector. We halted many areas that we thought were insurmountably big and had so much momentum to them that we could not, as consumers, affect them, but for decades of slow transition. We halted those industries in a matter of days on a global scale. And it's showing us the capacity of what an intentioned and focused community of 7.8 billion people are capable of. And so what we're going to do here today, you thought you were coming in to talk about fasting. We will certainly touch on that. But what I really want to do today is take advantage of the 10,000 plus people that are joining either live right now or in watching this recording afterwards, with a unified intention for healing for this land, for healing for the suppressed people, women, children, minorities, developing nations that have been crushed under the weight of empire. Let's take a moment to pause as those that enjoy the 1% wealth of that empire. Let's take a pause to consider a new future together. So to do this straightforward process, I want you to sit up straight wherever you may be and put your feet flat on the ground in front of you, uncross your legs. Go ahead and sit straight, and I'm going to let you choose your breathing technique of preference. Nothing special needed here, but I want you to focus in on your breath for a minute and really zero in on the silence between the noise of the air moving through the nostrils. And you might want to hold the breath at the top of the breath, and then again hold the breath for a few seconds at the bottom of the breath to see and experience the silence that's in your body between the movement of air in and out. And let's take that silent space and then create an intention for unification and healing of peoples across this planet, for the good of the planet, for the good of our peoples and our children. Let's take that opportunity together. So zero in. I'll interrupt us in a minute or two after you've had time to find that silence in your body, and we'll dive into the topic of this fasting journey that we can go on together. Thank you all for that. Even in a week where I've been thinking so much more about this topic of silence than maybe a typical week, it always startles me on how good it feels. It feels so incredibly good to take that moment away from my mind and the running thoughts and the conversations, to take that peace. I feel a little bit conflicted about jumping right into conversation after the peace of that silence. But I am grateful for the opportunity to be in conversation with all of you. And so we will jump into this journey. Many of you have had unique experiences through the week, and I'm excited for you to share anything that's coming through there. But I want to focus in for a few minutes on kind of my journey with fasting, how I got to that place in my life. It's definitely contrary to all of my medical education that I received in academia, and my journey even as an endocrinologist specializing in diabetes and metabolic conditions, obesity, and the rest. Cushing's was one of my areas of expertise, which plagues people with severe morbid obesity and all of this. And through all that journey, nobody ever mentioned to me as fasting as a possibility. And so I think it's a new science, and I think it's a science that's been at the same time embedded in ancient human behavior. Nearly every religion on the planet has spoken to the importance of intermittent fasting throughout the year at different things, in recognition of celebrations of spiritual events, or in recognition of the importance of mindfulness and meditation or prayer. And so we realize, while this may seem new to you, as the fasting starts to shift our consciousness, that we are actually tapping into an old consciousness, an old awareness that goes back many thousands of years of human experience on the kind of intentional planning of fasting. And then we have to acknowledge that it has existed really since the beginning of mankind in the unintentional starvation periods that have been so prevalent in our lifetimes. And you only have to go back to, my grandparents' generation to hear the stories of, my grandparents starving in West Virginia during the Great Depression, and lining up for food, for food kitchens in Kentucky, where they were in soup lines and everything else, waiting for handouts. And my grandfather actually worked with Eleanor Roosevelt, driving through the countryside, mobilizing philanthropic arms for Paul Mellon and many of the other kind of robber baron wealth dynasties of that first half of the 20th century. And the stories that I heard from him were just so striking and unimaginable to a kid growing up in the affluence of the 70s and 80s and 90s. Growing up in that environment where you can't imagine that these streets were filled with hungry people just such a short period back. And I'm moved that this is happening all over the world again, as we mentioned at the beginning, that we have catastrophic loss of food integrity and food safety and food providence for families all over the world. One poignant example is working recently with Eric Cutter, who is one of our great farm heroes in the United States. He's been working on really innovating in the area of urban agriculture, and he's been helping the Irvine Food Bank outside of Los Angeles. The demand on that single food bank has gone from their baseline of 250,000 families a month to 500,000 families a month in this short period of time. And so to imagine in the affluence of Los Angeles, 500,000 people being dependent on only one of the many food banks within that massive municipality is really telling of the degree of starvation and hunger that's happening amongst us. And so we're tapping into a real human experience when we voluntarily move into fasting, and we can meet our brothers and sisters that are in the developing world or within our developed economies that are suffering under poverty and suppression. We can acknowledge that journey for them, and perhaps celebrate that they could find some health in this journey, for all of the corruption and brokenness of the food systems that would leave our children and adults hungry in these times. It is hopeful to me that they may be finding a deeper spiritual health and physical health on the tail end of the resolution of those hunger periods. And it means that we should speed the solutions to them, because they may have the most profound insights of any of us as they learn through their deprivation and through the heartbreak of their economic hardships and everything else. At any rate, I am moved by all of that, my journey into fasting, interestingly, again, this began in my own understanding of nutrition being disassembled. I really believed that nutrition was a story of calorie input and transformation into biophotonic energy inside of our cells by mitochondria. That's really what I was trained into. And so you take a calorie of fat or a calorie of carbohydrate, the mitochondria doesn't care. Mitochondria doesn't care because it's going to turn both fat and sugar into the same energy. That was the dogma that I was born into as a Western medicine physician and my vague understanding of nutrition. What I now understand is that we have widespread starvation happening in the United States due to nutrient deficiency within calorie-rich diets. And so why we would eat ourselves to obesity is largely because of the fact that our body is seeking nutrient density, seeking nutrient foundation in a food system that is largely now devoid in it. It is now estimated that you have to eat 50 potatoes to get the same nutrient density you would have gotten from a single potato in the 1950s. So in that short 70-year period, we have, vastly decreased the impact of nutrient density, which means you're going to eat many potatoes in search of that same vitamin C level that you can get from a potato, the same extraordinary micromineral and amino acid mix that you will find on the skin of a sweet potato or a purple potato from Peru or the like. And so we've developed a food system that forces us to overeat in the pursuit of ever narrowing spectrum of nutrients that are deficient within that system. So on the one side, we are going into an obese situation with a nutrient deficiency. And on the other side of that equation, of course, we're steeping ourselves in a chemical food system that's delivering strange chemicals that are endocrine disruptors, microplastics, preservatives, of course, the pesticides, herbicides, emulsifiers in our food system. And then the flavorings, the whole cadre of over 100 compounds or whatever it is now that's allowed to be labeled as natural flavorings in your food it's an extraordinary array of non-naturally occurring chemicals that mimic flavor within our foods. And this can be things like synthetic MSG all the way to the like cherry flavoring or watermelon flavoring or whatever you're doing in your sparkling water these days. Those natural flavorings are non-naturally occurring compounds largely that are dangerous and toxic to the human body at even trace levels. We can track those impacts on neurochemistry, on neurobehavioral systems of the body and the rest. And so in this, we see an opportunity to give rest and to set a new foundation towards reprogramming the body for a nutrient delivery system rather than a drug and calorie delivery system. And that's the need that is really, or that's the opportunity you have that I think really empowers a fast. A fast of a period of time, whether it be 18 hours for your intermittent fasting and you repeat that every day for a week or two, or it be the more extended 3 to 5 day water fast, all of those are journeys into a reset of your drug-like dependence on the food system coming in. I certainly thought of myself as somebody who was chronically hypoglycemic as I moved into my life as a physician and everything else. I was constantly bringing snacks. My white coat in the hospital was always crammed full with some sort of granola bar or crap food that was stuck in my pocket that I could jam in my face on a moment's notice, because it was routine in a 36-hour shift that you really never sit down to eat a full meal. And I thought that I was, my symptoms of, jitteriness, brain fog, exhaustion, a little bit of dizziness, headache were all coming from hypoglycemia and nutrient, deficiency, when in fact the symptoms were a dysregulation of my autonomic nervous system. And my autonomic nervous system was stressed out to the point where just a change in the amount of glucose to insulin ratios or other hormonal shifts that were happening or neurochemistry that was happening as my body was starting to call me into some sort of shift in biology to mobilize calories from my liver instead of my food intake. I didn't understand that at the autonomic nervous system level. And so I would develop all of these symptoms that I was told were symptoms of hypoglycemia, when in fact, we cannot become hypoglycemic in that short period of time through natural systems. The only thing that can really force a true hypoglycemic instance where it's the lack of sugar rather than the stress hormone reaction, the autonomic nervous system reaction to it, is if you're on medications that that sugar down. So insulin, a lot of the insulin sensitizer drugs that we put type 2 diabetics on, those are true hypoglycemic experiences, much different than the run-of-the-mill person whose blood sugar is dipping naturally to mobilize resources from other parts of their body. And so in my journey into fasting, I had to get over my mental belief that I was somebody prone to hypoglycemia. I have no diabetes. I have no reason that I could not have mobilized calories from my liver, but I had not, despite 17 years of education, endocrine background, and everything else, I had not come to terms with the fact that biology was obviously screaming at me that I had capacity to do this thing called fasting. So that journey was broken by my first fast. You know, that belief system was shattered by that first fast. By the time I was 3 days into not eating anything, I couldn't even believe it. I couldn't believe that I felt well enough to work. I couldn't believe I could exercise still. It was blowing my mind that I was still even like standing. I fully expected to be like laid out for 3 days in misery and, you know, mood disorder by that time. In fact, it was the opposite. I felt more clarity as the days went on. Sure, I felt hungry at moments, but that hunger really changed its form after the first 24 hours. And the transition became really clear that I was starting to experience physiology that in 40 years previous I had never experienced. And so the last many years of going through these intermittent fasts and, you know, once or twice a year doing the long-term fast, I've really journeyed through many layers of detoxing my own body and seeing my body mobilize, you know, damaged resources and start to practice a regenerative youthifying process. And it's a great joy that I now wake up in the mornings without the chronic ache and fatigue that I had 15 years ago when I was a resident at the university. I was in such agony every morning waking up. I had so much inflammation in my body. I actually developed shingles when I was 28 years old in the middle of residency due to just the sheer biologic stress that I was putting myself under. And so that really revealed to me that I had the wrong metrics for health, but it would take another 10 years after those shingles for me to really understand what I was missing in my understanding of health and physiology. So this will be a journey that we will have available to each of you as you start to embark. You're going to each have your own version of this journey into your trepidation, your preconceived notions about fasting, your preconceived experiences, and then we start moving into the opportunity to learn from you. And each of you will have a different, not only experience biologically, but I think spiritually and at that kind of intuitive intellectual level, or the space between the intuitive and the intellectual level, you could find a real silence and truth in there that has the knowingness. And I think there's a difference between consciousness and knowingness. Consciousness kind of requires a perspective, whereas the knowingness is in a constant field. It's always available to us. And then when we start to perceive it, we start to develop that conscious thought about that knowingness. It shifts a little bit, and we can contaminate that with previous beliefs or emotional drama or whatever it is we tag onto that. But there's this real quality of knowingness that's in your field, somewhere between the intellect and consciousness is that space. And that's what I think I started to really realize I was able to access more clearly through these fasting episodes. So that's a little bit of my journey, a little bit of my fascination with it. And I want to open it up now so that we can spend some time in dialogue together and going through that. Let's take a look here. All right. So there's a lot of questions that are coming through that are pretty specific to different conditions. There's mentions of gout, there's mentions of diabetes, there's mentions of breast cancer, there's mentions of vaccine injury, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Scrolling through here quickly. Dietary restrictions. Issues with lymphatics going on. So what you're seeing here is a whole, a bunch of predictable questions that are wondering if your physiology is unique to either preventing or changing the pattern of possibility of fasting in your life. And as I said earlier, the exciting thing about fasting is it's accessible to everybody. There's a question about children as whether they're accessible to this. Obviously, through human history, every condition has gone through starvation, right? And so people with gout, people with diabetes, people with cancer have gone through starvation. And so the proof is in the pudding that whether in a medical lab or in the history of mankind, we can say with great confidence that fasting has been achieved with the same biology behind the scenes, regardless of the conditions that we've been told we have. The risk comes in the pharmaceutical, behavior around these conditions. And so there are pharmaceutical drugs that, Coumadin comes to mind as an obvious one, a blood thinner. If you're on a blood thinner or you're on diabetes medications, these are common ones that really rely on consistent food intake to keep you safe with the potential real harm that those drugs come with. And so certainly if you are on a pharmaceutical regimen, I would highly recommend tying back into your care team, physician, nurse practitioner, whoever's your identified care team. You're going to want to work with them to review your med list and really identify areas of opportunity to reduce risk during a fast, and talk to them about what might be alternatives to those medications as you get healthier through your fasting. It's not too surprising that those drugs that we most often use that would be risky during a fast, like your diabetes medicines, are actually replaced by a fast in their function. And a fast is going to achieve much better insulin sensitization than any of the drugs I use as an endocrinologist for type 2 diabetes. And so it's worthwhile to mention to those physicians when you approach them and say, can we come off my diabetes medicines? I'm going to be doing a fast so that I can insulin sensitize and become less type 2 diabetic. For your type 1 diabetes, the obvious thing is you're going to need to stay on some insulin there. If you make no insulin, again, check with your endocrinologist, check with your physician team to tease out how you do a basal insulin level during fasting. I've done it in many type 1 diabetics. It just takes a little bit of extra monitoring, but it's quite easy. In fact, those diabetics are usually completely relieved not to have to be doing all the complexity of calorie counting and insulin sensitivity calculations and correction factor scores and ratios and all of that complexity of day-to-day suddenly goes away, and you have a nice quiet basal insulin level to carry you through safely through a fast. So worthwhile to say that it can be done safely in anybody with any condition mentioned, but I recommend a care team involved if you have any diagnosis, especially if there's pharmaceutical management of that diagnosis going on. For children, I think that intermittent fasting is an interesting thing to work in. In general, I don't see a need to fast kids unless they really have endocrine disorder before puberty. Without any endocrine disorder before puberty, which would include things like precocious puberty, childhood obesity, and those things. For those kinds of kids, I think there is utility in training them to do intermittent fasting and longer term fasting. But as for all of us, regardless of the age, I believe there's a training process that's necessary here. So that training process begins, I think, in first the psychological, experience and building enough knowledge and awareness so that you feel confident going into this experience. And then releasing expectations. If you decide to do intermittent fasting, you find that fasting till noon is leaving you feeling poor, adjust that schedule and watch that in your life. And longer term fasting, same kind of thing. If you have set yourself a goal of 5 days of fasting and you find that you can't actually hit 5 days, and instead by the time you're hitting day 2 or 3, you're hitting the wall and you feel the need to break the fast, that's no problem. Release the expectations that you're going to do this, all the way through a 5-day period the very first time you do this, and let it be a basic part of your journey to allow any outcome to happen. Learn from that, and then move back into it again later down the road, a week later, months later, year later. It doesn't really matter to me. But the point being that you don't ever expect it to be the same as it was last time either. So if you have been through some short-term fasting and say, well, this happened to me, therefore I'm never doing it again, keep in mind that if you start to repeat that attempt more frequently, every few months or whatever it is, your body is going to be training itself into the capacity. Intermittent fasting is a very critical training tool for long-term fasting. So those would be some of my general broad strokes of cautions, if you will, and opportunities for you to engage your care team, and then start to look back into the literature for more detailed opinions and perspectives on this beyond what I can bring to you in this short period of engagement here. Jumping back to the Q&A here. Some of the posts talked about women's cycles, and there was some flashback to that, some concerns that men are saying that men don't have the same capacity of women to benefit from fasting or have the neuroplasticity. Certainly we all have the capacity to benefit, and certainly we all go through hormonal shifts month on month. And so or through the cycle of a month. And so whether male or female, we have new capacity for different levels of detox and regeneration. In general, for the male, I don't really make too fine of a point of it unless you have a family member in the home that's fasting with you, or if you're, you know, in close proximity, like a significant other or partner that's on a menstrual cycle. You may want to pay attention to their menstrual cycle, and that you probably are cycling at a similar rate of ups and downs with testosterone as they will to their estrogen levels. And so thinking about timing it with their luteal phase where they have high estrogen progesterone levels, there's some theoretical benefits to that, but there's never been a study to my knowledge to show benefit in men to follow that cycle. But I think there's a lot of rationale to it, and I think it's interesting for you to pay attention to your partner's cycle, and then think about your own behavior. When are you feeling well in the month? When do you start having headaches in the month? All of these things, and then start to look at the moon cycle, start to look at that menstrual cycle of partners and everything else, to start to realize this isn't random events you're experiencing. You don't randomly get a headache ever. A headache is a very complicated dysfunction within the body that requires a lot of things to go wrong. And so starting to understand your physiologic rhythms, you know, even starting with just the daily circadian rhythm and understanding the disruption that comes in poor sleep quality and the rest, it's important for us to start, you know, listening to these bodies more acutely. There's a question about menopause related to that. Certainly there's, just like in men, there's no downside of you know, doing this when you have less of a severe estrogen cycle as you would. But it turns out that women in menopause still have cycling with the moon and other circadian rhythms of the planet. And in this case, in menopause, your estrogen and downstream estrone and all of these things are made by the adrenal glands rather than the ovaries. So you're still making many of these hormones. The whole concept that you can't make estrogen after menopause is really erroneous. And of course, if that was true, then we would never put all the women with breast cancer on estrogen blockers. You're making estrogen all the time from the adrenals as your ovaries start to give up that mission. And the way in which we make it look like you're estrogen deficient is we study estradiol. So if you go in menopause and they study your estrogen level, they're going to typically just study assay estradiol, which makes it look like you are severely estrogen deficient. But if you measure estrone, you'll realize that which is the breakdown product of estrogen, you've got a bunch of it because your adrenals are making estrone directly. And so we've pharmaceuticalized this hormone industry in functional medicine, integrative medicine, and allopathic medicine by only assaying the top of that estrogen cascade and not giving any due credit to the adrenal glands and their daily work in producing these hormones. The adrenal glands will respond to the pituitary gland just like the ovaries do, through a different, you know, hormone cascade in some circumstances. But those adrenal glands are going to respond to the pituitary, which is responding to the entire cerebral cortex and the deep brain, which is responding, of course, to environmental cues, day-night cycles, moon cycles, all of this. And so, regardless of your point of life, whether you're, you know, just past puberty and you're a teenager wanting to explore, you know, measured fasting, or an adult, or in your postmenopause, or even our really extreme geriatric patients can find real relief in fasting. The amount of neurologic stress and brain fog can really lighten dramatically in an 80-year-old who will do some fasting. At every age, remember to be training into it. So the short-term fasting being your training zone for the longer-term fasting to do that safely. And I always encourage a medical team to be around you who's got some experience in helping you through that journey. There's a question here about what's the importance of mobilizing fat in the liver, which I think is a really important question, because if the fat is largely just getting turned into the same fuel at the mitochondria as the sugar is, why bother? Why do this? And there's many reasons to this, but one of the most important ones in our modern era is detoxification. So the vast majority of those toxins that come in our food system, in the air we breathe, from the lawn management, golf courses, you know, all of the rest of this stuff, we are accumulating these fat soluble toxins in the liver primarily. And so, and that would go for, you know, anything that's foodborne as well. So the toxins that you would find, heavy metals, all the way to the endocrine disruptors, all the way to the microplastics that end up in our canned beverages and everything else, all of those are going to end up preferentially in the liver fat of the liver. The vast majority of toxins on the planet are fat soluble, and then it's only recently that we've started to really add, large volumes of water soluble herbicides like Roundup or glyphosate to the mix. And so we're going to find in that liver fat, which is the filter for the whole body. Remember that, or maybe you haven't been told, but the entire bloodstream of your small intestine and colon goes into a single blood vessel that's the size of a garden hose and plugs into the liver. So you're taking all of that nutrient, all the toxins, all of the junk out of your food, water, etc., and you're cramming it into the liver. It then has to filter all of that through hepatocytes, which are the liver cells, passaging nutrients and cholesterol and sugars and fats and fibers into their soluble and organized bioavailable nutrients for delivery to the body, and then the liver sends that out the other side. When we see high degrees of liver stress, and glyphosate's a phenomenal example of this, when you hit liver cells with glyphosate, it induces stress at the mitochondrial level, and they stop burning fat and they accumulate fat in the liver. And so not only is there water soluble and fat soluble toxins in our environment, fat soluble toxins get stored when those water soluble toxins like Roundup disrupt normal fat metabolism. So Roundup in our diet is now recognized to be one of the leading causes of fatty liver, which is of course the underlying physiology of type 2 diabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome, much of the infertility in women, as well as other insulin resistant disorders, metabolic dysfunction of autoimmune conditions and beyond. And so it's a really profound reality that liver fat is almost like ground zero here for the whole gut-body, gut-brain axis. And by encouraging that burning of that fat storage, we can reset the endocrine system. As we develop fat in the liver, we develop insulin resistance, diabetes eventually, and when we develop insulin resistance, we get a shift in estrogen progesterone ratios if female, and we get switches in testosterone to estrogen ratios in the male. And so the visceral fat in and around the liver of males has a very high estrase level in it, which will convert testosterone into estrogen. And so all these men who are showing up in endocrine clinics, getting testosterone supplements are being really poisoned by estrogen in the end, and we end up with an estrogen overload. We can get gynecomastia, which is breast growth in the male, and we can get that from testosterone supplementation. We can also exacerbate fatty liver further by that testosterone adjunct. And so usually men will feel better in those first few weeks of testosterone supplement. They say, oh, this really worked for me. I must need my testosterone. And then within a few months of continuing to take that on a daily basis, they start to see this metabolic repercussions, having no idea it's linked to their testosterone supplement. So it's really important for us to take a holistic view and understand that fat metabolism is critical to human health. And as we disrupt that and create fat storage in the liver, we're screwing up the entire endocrine system, metabolic system, and beyond. There's a good question here around bowel management during fasting. As you'll notice, as you go into days 3 and beyond, typically you're not having any bowel movements, or you're having very scant bowel movements. To keep, in general, that feels fine. I don't worry about it typically, but if I start to feel bloated or constipated during a fast, then just increasing your magnesium intake is a powerful tool. So one of the ones that's almost ubiquitous now in all of the grocery stores is the Mag Natural Calm brand, which comes in a canister. It's a powder of magnesium citrate. You can sort of stir that into water, consume that, and it's an easy magnesium source that the majority of it will stay in the bowel. So it's a good cathartic to keep the bowel moving during that time. Other supplements that you should take during a fast, we love taking ion through that time. This is obviously very biased because my companies make that supplement, which was Restore before ion. So very biased answer here, but the rationale behind that is kind of important in that what you're doing during a fast is obviously giving gut motility and the immune system sitting behind that gut lining an opportunity to rest and regenerate. And if you're taking ion or Restore there, you're going to see this magnification of that opportunity because you're helping accelerate the healing of that gut lining. So you're reversing the gut permeability through your endogenous repair systems of the human cells as they're supported and empowered by the ion product. So I love taking the ion through that. I use it as really a go-to, especially if I start bonking and I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, I got to eat something, or I'm feeling lightheaded or weak. Swish, swallow, a cap full of ion, and it brings an immediate restoration of that neurologic autonomic nervous system, effect of the gut, which would bring motility and a little bit of gut-brain axis stimulation there in those first few minutes upon swallowing that. So really fast way to kind of help through the bonking there. And again, giving further rest and restorative capacity and reservoir to that immune system is exciting. We've shown in a double-blind placebo-controlled trial with ion that healthy individuals can radically increase the amount of lysine that their gut microbiome makes. And lysine reorganizes the relationship of T cells to pathogens and the microbiome at large. And so you have this opportunity, especially in a time like COVID, to mobilize more resources to maintain a healthy balance to the microbiome around you, whether it be virome or otherwise. So lysine upregulates, carnitine also upregulates during the use of ion, and that's a very interesting one to bring into the context of a fast. Carnitine has very interesting effects on lean muscle metabolism and the like. So in the interest of speeding up that lean muscle metabolism, we can really see that going through. An important question here about exercising during fasting, and this is really going to depend on your personal journey. I would say if you're going into intermittent fasting, it's very easy to do your workout in the morning. My favorite time is somewhere between 8 and 9 a.m. because then I'm taking advantage of some of the hormones that have kicked in response to ghrelin rising and all of this. So 8 to 9 a.m. workout when you're intermittent fasting, and then break your fast around noon or 1 p.m. depending on when you stopped eating dinner the night before. Try to do an 18-hour fast, but 16 seems to be enough to really make a pretty big difference. And so I prefer 18 hours for sure, but if 16 is all your body's telling you at the beginning, you can try that. So starting into a little bit of early morning exercise. If you caught my 4-minute workout yesterday, if you haven't seen that before, you can go back to the Instagram post on that, or you can jump on YouTube, search my name, Zach Bush, 4-minute workout. That 15-minute tutorial will take you through the rationale behind this 4-minute workout that I developed years ago, and why it can be very helpful to fasting. And so when you're doing the 4-minute workout, you really don't need any new caloric demand. Instead, you're not trying to burn calories. Instead, you're trying to release nitric oxide. And by releasing nitric oxide, you're increasing muscle metabolism for the next 6 to 8 hours. And the fun thing is you can refill your nitric oxide reservoir every 2 hours. The whole blood vessel lining, the endothelium, is where you produce and store nitric oxide. So if you repeat that 4-minute workout a couple times a day during a fast, we recommend 3 times a day is like optimal. But that way, 21 times a week, you're dumping this massive nitric oxide load, and in the midst of burning fat in the liver, you're building lean muscle through the nitric oxide stimulation. And so it's a very good way to mobilize those liver fat storages when you're in a relatively quiet state from a metabolic standpoint otherwise. So 4-minute workout, great way to work through things. But once you've trained through a couple of longer term fasts, you're going to find out you can do a 60-minute aerobic workout with no problem during a longer term fast. Your body's going to get really good at mobilizing fat reservoirs, doing glycogen burning in the first 3 days, and then moving on to glucose metabolism as you mobilize fat through gluconeogenesis into sugar production. So you can sustain amazing amounts of activity. One of my colleagues, a physician down in the South, and a very busy physician, runs a very big hospital system, and he decided that he was fed up of doing these like diets and calorie restrictions and everything else that he'd been trying to do to get back to some sort of normal weight. And he just had this frustrating, climb in his weight over decades. And in his 50s, he went on his first fast, felt so good at 5 days, he decided to extend that to 7 days, decided that felt so good, he extended it to 10 days, went to 14. By 14 days, he had lost so much weight and was feeling so phenomenal in the gym that he decided to keep pushing it without a dead end, and decided he'd start eating when he felt poorly. Feeling poorly, and ended up breaking it around a family event that was occurring around a big celebration in his family, and ended that fast at 57 days. He ate no food for 57 days. He was on a water fast for that period of time. Lost weight very rapidly in the first month of that, but then stabilized, and his body found a real nice homeostasis in the last 20, 30 days of that fast, which was fascinating for me to watch. I had never seen anybody fast that long. And it was really a beautiful thing. And he worked full time in the hospital throughout that time, worked out normal routines throughout that time. There was one period during the 57 days where he suddenly fell off, felt like he was like maybe a little bit of feverish and just felt crammy, laid down, slept it off that afternoon, got up the next morning feeling well. He doesn't know if that was a detox event. He doesn't know if that was a virus that was coming through or what the trigger was. But that was the only time in the 57 days he felt it all off. And so that was startling for me to watch, and it really kind of humbled me to realize, you know, this 5-day fasting is really scratching the surface of our biologic potential. And the fact that he was able to reach a biologic neutral state where he was eating no food, taking in no calories, and not losing weight was mysterious to me. And this gets at the interesting history of, you know, some questions coming in on social media over the course of the week, and of course, into this section here, as well as breatharians. You know, you've read about or heard about people that stop eating for long periods of time, and they call themselves breatharians because they think they're taking in their nutritional content from the air around them. My belief system is much different around that. I think that what's actually happening is they've reached a really cool microbial diversity within their gut. In the fasting state, the microbes are creating, like you would experience in sauerkraut or a fermentation process, your microbiome has started to ferment food remnants, scraps, fibrous material within your gut lining that has chronically, you know, been stored up there. And then within a week or two, as you burn through that supply, it will start thriving off the cells that are sloughing from your gut lining. You slough billions and billions of cells every day into your microbiome from your gut lining, which turns over completely every 3 days. And so now your nutrient bed, your microbiome is fueled by your very human cells themselves, and you're creating a very interesting, you know, long-term fermentation of human cells as the microbes digest that. And now you become your own nutrient source. And that's a fascinating, you know, possibility that we are capable of generating cells quick enough that they could become a nutrient source for a microbiome that would feed us back the amino acids and, you know, basic building blocks of protein, cholesterol, and everything else that gut lining is making and feeding that back to us. So I think we have just grossly misimagined or underestimated our capacity for resilience and regeneration as we think through all of this. We're cruising through time here, so much appreciating the speed at which your questions are coming in here. There was a question about other supplements. You know, in general, I don't think you need any other supplements outside of the basics of magnesium, keeping that gut going. If it's wintertime or you're not getting any outdoor time, then vitamin D is not harmful through that process. But things I would back off on would be things like iron that's mentioned here. Iron is very constipating, so trying to take that in the midst of the fast, probably not a good idea. So backing off on iron for those few days, or thinking about timing your intermittent fasts where you have fewer supplements coming in during that time would be significant. But in general, vitamin C would be example one I would stop. Anything that says that it's an antioxidant, I would actually think about stopping during this time, because most antioxidants are actually oxidants that trigger an antioxidant production by our body. So vitamin C is an oxidant, alpha lipoic acid or L-lipoic acid or R-lipoic acid, all of those are potent oxidants. They literally will say on the bottle that they are an antioxidant, but in fact, it's because of their oxidative stress that they do to the body that they can induce an antioxidant response. And so for those that are pure oxidants, like your vitamin C, alpha lipoics, and all that, I would just back off on those. No reason to be on that, and potential, you know, undue work done on the body during that time with those things. So just take a pause for a few days on that kind of supplementation in general. If you have, you know, supplements that were started and are being followed by a physician or caretaker team, I would very much, you know, review that supplement list just as you would a pharmaceutical list to make sure you're not on things, you know, things that I would also stop, things like milk thistle and things like that come to mind. So if you're on a long list of supplements, especially any supplements for antioxidant or liver support, I'd back off on those during a fast and let your body do what it does best. It knows how to fast. It just needs to be exercised towards it. And so giving yourself that opportunity to learn how to do that will be very cool. There's a lot of questions on coffee, which isn't terribly surprising to me, just because it's one of the most common drugs that we're addicted to here. overall, I don't, not terribly concerned about coffee, but the whole point of a fast for me is really breaking psychologic behavior. And so I would take this opportunity of a fast to think about switching to green tea so that you're not withdrawing from your caffeine. Because last thing you probably need on your first fast is a caffeine withdrawal syndrome and headache and all of that. And so replace that with green tea as a nice source of caffeine that's less prone to mold, for example. Most coffee beans have mold toxin in them, and you have to go to some pretty specialty distributors that are actually screening for these things. Bulletproof got famous for it with Dave Asprey's efforts, but he actually picked up on other people's work, and there wasn't an origin story for him. But long and short of it is there's a few companies out there that are screening their coffee beans for molds and mold toxins before roasting. And so those are the kinds of supplies you might want to look for. Green tea, though, you're not going to get the mold toxin effect in there, so that may be beneficial during a fast to make that transition. I think it's always fun to break patterns of behavior. We are all addicted to something, it seems, and so if coffee seems to be your fix, think about an opportunity to use a fast to reset that behavior and belief system as well. Very good. All right. Well, we are cruising through time here. I want to wrap up in the next couple minutes, but I also want to reflect on the week. This has been a bit of an experiment for me. I've never tried to bring this much content and information through Instagram before into an Instagram community around the world. And I want you to give me feedback in the form of support if you're interested. We have a couple of opportunities for you here. Those opportunities would include, continued dialogue, obviously, online, certainly engaging us through Instagram, Facebook, and all of those would be absolutely, great. But I also would like to kind of extend to you some of the other resources. If you haven't checked out Zach Bush, MD, in the past, I would encourage you to go there. We're about to launch a new website that will have expanded educational resources there. But I see an opportunity here to really engage you guys in the opportunity to create a new education system that is free. Too much of, I think, the important information that's out there is being held behind closed doors or paywalls or the rest. I certainly have paid material that are accessible to the world. We love the Intrinsic Health series. We have an incredible group of coaches and health practitioners that are engaged there. We love delivering all of that content. It's 8 hours of didactic information supported by weekly coaching experiences that run for 4 weeks in our Biology Basecamp Community Connect, or on the one-on-one journey. Your 8-week journey is supported every week by a one-on-one coach. And the amount of transformation we see in these journeys is just really mind-blowing. And we see people from age 18 to 80 doing these courses, and every one of them at every stage of life coming back with a massive transformational experience that came from within them. It's not because they listened to me and learned something and therefore transformed. It's because we learned enough to create enough space and trust to their own intuition, and what comes out is profound. And the coach is the critical piece of that journey. And so if you feel like you don't have a team around you that can really help you understand the power of fasting in your life to prevent chronic disease, reverse chronic disease, or whatnot, then certainly the Intrinsic Health series brings an important team around you and is a great resource to you. So you'll see a page at the end of this that can take you to that. If the page is technically challenged and that's not getting up, you can just visit us at zachbushmd.com and jump on that. But beyond that, I really think there's an opportunity here to build something beautiful together. And so I've actually created a GoFundMe page as a complete experiment here. And so I'm coming to you with complete vulnerability and humility to ask for your engagement and see what we can create as a community. I see the opportunity to raise monies for a research and publishing team with the mission of bringing free healthcare information to the public all the time. And so on my GoFundMe page, we're shooting for $250,000 of fundraising over the coming months to really raise enough awareness. And there's enough people that signed up for this. If everybody would throw in just $25, we would hit that mark almost immediately, and it'd allow me to hire up a number of researchers and publishing team so that we can start generating an enormous amount of information. And I think there's desperate need for free information out there. And so if you want to click through to the Intrinsic Health Series for personal stuff. But if you really want to be part of a global health education movement, I'd be excited to see this GoFundMe thing start moving us that direction. So again, it's a new program, a new concept that I think the world is really needing right now. But I think your support will be telling there. So in addition to bringing a donation, whether it be the $25 or $5 or $100, whatever you feel like inspired to participate in, it'll allow me to keep bringing this kind of content and much more to the Instagram world and to the social media world. But importantly, we need to start thinking beyond those, and how do we start creating direct communications that are not going through these platforms that are prone to so much censorship and limitation of worldviews and perspectives that are so desperately needed to bring us to a better sense of clarity on public health crisis that we're in the midst of now. So please feel free to engage in both avenues. If you missed all of that, don't worry, it's been recorded. And we'll get this out to you by email so that you have the link to review the hour together. And you visit us at zachbushmd.com for more opportunities to engage in the many other projects. That would include our nonprofit like Farmer's Footprint, where we're starting to really create new awareness around farming and soil. And we're now expanding that nonprofit to cover the areas of air and water systems globally. And that soil, water, air coming under a new moniker of Project Biome is a new exciting project. So keep in tune. If you think you've seen it all with Farmer's Footprint, wait till Project Biome rolls out in these coming months. So very exciting times for us with all these projects, and excited and grateful to each of you for being so supportive to me over these years, all of the hearts and love that flow through to me every day through Instagram. I can't really express to you my deep gratitude for that. It buoys me up at moments where I lose hope, where I lose energy, where I lose focus. You guys as a community keep coming around me to bless me with your vision of the world, your vision of the beauty around you. Thank you for all of you who participate in the hashtag Breathe Your Biome movement, those thousands of images that have come in from around the world of you and children and grandkids and animals and pets all running around together out in nature are really my life's blood. I page through those every day to take a glance through the new pictures coming in through hashtag Breathe Your Biome, because it's inspiring to imagine a future where we all engage every day with a Mother Nature that's beyond our capacity to appreciate in her sheer beauty and her grace and her patience with a very stubborn and consumptive and frankly greedy species that we are. So let's learn from Mother Nature. Let's jump in and in deep gratitude, we'll close down the hour together. Thank you for your time and your commitment.